Hi, I'm here with a lecture on Plato's Republic, and this will attempt to treat the topics of justice and the good. I say attempt to treat just because anyone familiar with Plato or just familiar with those words will have a sense for just kind of how lofty both of those themes are. And so if I can have if I can provide brief visions or something into those themes, then I think that should be all that I can hope for. And just preparing for this lecture, trying to structure the thoughts into a way that they can be, kind of to articulate them in words, I guess, to make them communicable, and intelligible to anyone. It's sort of even that it sort of has it gives me a feeling as though my mind is sort of like stretched beyond itself or outside of itself, standing outside of itself. And so, but that being said, I'm going to do my best, and of course, I encourage everyone to consult Plato on this. I think does a better job than I can hope to do. But if I can, in some way serve to help people to grasp and to appreciate Plato, and to basically, I guess, best way to think of it is to help people, including myself, see what Plato could see. Not so much learning about Plato, or imagine Plato as pointing a finger, and we don't study his finger so much as try to understand what he's pointing to. And so, if this lecture can contribute in any small way, then I have to count that as a success. Like I suggested, there are two sort of fundamental themes, among a thousand other topics and themes that Plato brings up in any one of his dialogues. But these two themes are fundamentally first justice, and then the good itself. And so I have in mind to kind of follow the sequence that Plato also follows in the Republic. That's to say, starting with justice and then moving to the good. Before I begin, however, I wanted to just treat two different topics, sort of just by way of kind of laying the groundwork to make what follows a little bit more intelligible. And so first I'm going to say a little bit about Plato's doctrine of the forms, or the ideas, and then a little bit about symbol or myth or metaphor. And so starting with the doctrine of the forms, the ideas, this is something that unfortunately it seems that most often encountered in kind of caricatured form. Interestingly, even Plato's own student, Aristotle, in a number of passages, he almost he suggests that he didn't, like, even Aristotle failed to really grasp what Plato was after with the forms. And so I hope that we can try to give Plato a sort of charitable reading, and again, try to first understand how what he says can be true before we consider whether it's true. And so basically the doctrine of the forms, he has a sort of kind of an invitation for us. In the Republic, he makes a comment. He says that whenever a number of individuals have a common name, we can assume them also to have a corresponding idea or form. This is a quote from Socrates from the Republic. And one might think, sort of like names are sort of arbitrary. Why would we assume that? And that's probably a pretty popular, common objection. But I'm confident that if we think about it a little bit, it's a much more profound statement than it might seem at first. This is something that I will, in fact, hopefully, the discussion of the good. So at the end of this lecture, that discussion will also serve to shed light on this issue right here before us, about whether having a common name suggests anything beyond that. Because we might think, well, names, we just sort of they're just like labels, almost like sticky notes. There's a great scene in one of Gabriel Marquez's famous works, 100 Years of Solitude, Cien Años de Soledad, where the village, they're stricken with a plague of amnesia, and the way they respond to it, the remedy they come up with is by placing, not sticky notes exactly, but labels on everything. So if they have a table, they don't have to remember what the table is called. Otherwise they would forget. But they have conveniently they've written down on a little piece of paper. They've written table, and they place it on the table, and so they don't forget. But that's how we, I think, often think of names, as though they could be sort of interchangeable. Like they're sort of purely conventional, I guess. And of course, that's partly true. The fact that, for instance, table, we can say table in English, we could say Tisch in German, we could say mesa in Spanish, we could say board in Norwegian, and 1,000 other things. That would suggest, again, that it is kind of a conventional label, if not totally arbitrary. And again, so there's certainly something to that. The other side of this, though, is if we think of how we know to apply the name table, how we know to imagine sticking labels on things. How is it that we know to put a table with what we know to be a table and not anything else? And you might say again, well, we just sort of learn by association, and that could be partly true, but it doesn't. It still doesn't really. How would I say? It sort of sweeps the dust under the rug. Excuse me, so to speak, because what it doesn't, it doesn't account for the fact that somehow we're able, in our minds, imagine before you even call it a table, somehow you have to recognize what it is that you're calling a table. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to differentiate it from, the rest of being, so to speak, the rest of reality. Something allows you to, better way to say this maybe is identity. Something gives the table its identity. And even before you have the name for table, in whatever language you come up with, again, you could call it anything, and you could draw from any language to give it a name. But something allows you, to, before the word even comes, in your, in your mind, in your intelligence, to be able to discern and discriminate the table from everything else that's not a table. And this is in some way language then, and even sort of like unspoken language. So even before language is expressed, language not only, on the one hand it's something we use to label things, but in some ways before that it's something we use by Plato's doctrine, it's in some way it also causes things, and that might seem strange, and it's certainly not the way we think of it today. But just take the table for example. There would you could not expect a table except that the idea of the table was present in somebody's mind, and this person was able to entertain and to participate in the idea of the table with his mind, and in order to stamp that idea onto adequate material substance. And so tables and everything else by extension doesn't just show up in that way. It somehow reflects the instantiation of forms or ideas. The reason that we have two words, both form and idea, and we also might even say concept. The reason we have two words, though, is because one of them derives from Greek and the other derives from Latin. And so when translators of Plato and Aristotle in the Latin world, they rendered the Greek word eidos into the Latin forma. And so in English we inherit both of those terms. But form and idea, please, for the purpose of this lecture, please consider them as exact synonyms. So I'm not differentiating between form and idea. So again, you have the form. Basically, what makes a table is not exactly what it's made of. So it's not the wood that makes a table, and it's not because why? Because a table could be made out of other things besides wood, obviously. It could be made out of steel or metal, for instance. Any kind of metal could be made out of plastic, maybe 1,000 other things too. It could be made out of just like, I don't know, a towel that you're having a picnic on, right? That's in some ways that's a rudimentary table. I'll return to this idea of the goodness of tables, so to speak, the degree of tableness in which to which any specific instance of a table is able to participate. I will return to that later with the discussion of the good. But I hope that it's starting to become clear in what way the idea of the table, it's not just it is a thought in our minds, but it's not only a thought in our minds. It's something that our minds are only able to, in some way we, and Plato will say this, that we see, we see things with our eyes, but we understand things with our minds, or we see things with our eyes, we see ideas with our minds. And so it's both a thought and also, the mind both entertains thoughts, but it also, is a kind of functions as an organ of perception. Again, we wouldn't recognize a table in the first place if we didn't know what a table was, if we didn't have the ability to entertain that idea and sort of see through that idea in our minds. In the same way that, and by the same token, so this is, the kind of, we might call it the subjective element or the subjective aspect of the idea, which is the way it appears, when it appears in our minds. That's one place, that's one, locus for the idea. And another one is when it appears in the world. And again, the table didn't just show up. It's rather specifically the, instantiation, the manifestation, the incarnation of an idea, of a form, the form of the table. And so I hope that's clear. The way in which, for Plato, and I think he's right about this. It's that when we think about thoughts and ideas and concepts, we tend to think of them as merely existing in our minds. And Plato, I think, helps us to see the way in which that's very one-sided. In fact, ideas, our minds and the world, they share what sort of our connection to the world is by way of our ability to participate in these ideas. And so the idea is both operative in some ways subjectively, but also objectively. Again, forgive me. I guess it's hard to describe this, and I hope that what I've said though is making it a little bit clearer. Plato points out later in the Republic. This is in Book 10, but it's a similar idea that it's kind of an ongoing theme for Plato. He uses the example of a bed later in the Republic, and he points out that that there's only one idea of a bed, and every individual bed or actual bed is an actual bed in virtue of the degree to which it participates in that idea of the bed. And so there are not as many ideas of beds as there are beds. There's rather one idea, and so sort of drawing this to a circle, I hope. There's sort of one idea of the bed, and it's the fact that there is that one idea of the bed, and that we are able to, that it's intelligible to us, that we're able to recognize beds as beds in the first place, and then finally that's the sort of precondition for us to be able to apply the common name of, quote, bed to all of those instances of the bed. And so I hope that can help to clarify what Plato means and the significance of his statement that when we the fact that we give a common name to things suggests that those things share something actually in common beyond their name, beyond merely their name, and that suggested that it's their identity. And it's their, and their identity is their degree of participation in, their idea or their essence. So I hope that's a little bit clearer. And I encourage anyone who's watching this to come up with other examples, and try try to place other examples in this same context and see the way in which the world is sort of it becomes coherent to us in some way because we're able to entertain and participate and perceive things through these ideas. The bed, for instance, just to give a small picture of that, the bed, for instance, as bed, it also participates in a greater unity, which is furniture, for instance, and so on and so on. Physical objects is an even more expansive category, and finally you get at something like reality as such, being as such. And this way of it. It renders the world coherent, in a way, to us. Without if this were not the case, that ideas were we didn't have this relationship to ideas, and ideas didn't have this relationship to the world. We wouldn't be able to argue about it in the first place, because we wouldn't have any coherent ground to stand on to begin with. So Plato, in other dialogues, Plato has many sort of funny scenes that he depicts in which somebody kind of denies, by the same token that a person argues against the reality of ideas, the same person is impossible to impossible to have a dialogue with, and that's somewhat of a separate topic, though it does show up in the Republic, and I'll say a few words about that shortly. The second thing that I want to say before broaching the theme of justice is just to say a few words about the utility of and the recourse that Plato always has to images and symbols and myths, and especially in the Republic, treating the themes of justice and the good. I said at the outset of this lecture that I'm going to attempt a lecture on these things, and in some ways it's ultimately impossible, because all that a person can do is say words, and the words, they're not the same thing as the meaning of the words in some way, and so Plato is, I think, quite cognizant of that, that limitation. And as a rule, whenever Plato comes up against a sort of like the limits of what can be simply expressed, or the limits of language, he as a rule, he almost always has recourse to a myth or a symbol or a picture. And I think there's a good reason that he does that, and it's because somehow we're able to grasp, in an allegorical way, what maybe eludes us when we try to pin it down with conceptual language. And so in both cases, both in respect to justice and in respect to the good, Plato has recourse to symbols and images. In the case of justice, in the first place, the title of the book itself, Republic, we should recall as we're going through the book that Plato's so-called doctrines about the state, about the Republic, these are we should keep these in context, which is that it's an elaborate metaphor, it's an elaborate conceit, and the state that Socrates is talking about, it's really for the sake of sort of exposition of elements of our own selves, of our own souls. And so he's not writing a political treatise in this case. Plato has other political treatises. This is not one of them. And on top of that, just as a kind of side note, when he's talking about the state, he's not talking about the state as a metaphor for the good. He's talking about the state as a metaphor for justice. And people tend to, confuse those two things and imagine that what Plato is propounding in the Republic is, again, like a specific set of instructions for how to govern a state. And I think that's partly true, but it's not the whole truth. The reason is because, justice is to establish the state on the foundations of justice. justice is one element of the good, but it's not all the elements of the good. It's not the whole good. And so ideally you would create a state according to the good as such, justice being one element of that, rather than selecting a single element out of the good to model the state on. Another symbol or image that Plato uses to depict justice is he gives the image of the self or the soul as kind of consisting in three elements, and one of them he pictures as in the form of a human being. Another one he pictures in the form of a lion, and a third one he pictures in the form of a hydra, a many-headed beast. And every head is kind of at odds with every other head. And Plato is invoking this as a symbol for sort of three capacities of the soul. The first one being the capacity to reason, and the capacity to basically recognize the good. And the second element, the lion element, it's the capacity of the soul that's able to, it's sort of energetic, spirited, passionate element of the soul that's able to sort of pursue honor and prestige and virtue. The third element of the soul, that's symbolized by a many-headed dragon. This is the element of the soul that pursues desires. And as the symbol suggests, every desire is in conflict, basically, with every other desire, almost, as the heads that are all maybe reaching in different directions they represent. And Plato uses the metaphor to suggest there's a proper ordering of these three things, despite that the dragon is in some ways the most powerful or the most formidable. In some way, in order for the soul to be ordered appropriately, it's the human being, the aspect that's represented by the human being that has to be sort of guiding the other elements of the soul, and this is for the sake of having a soul that's basically ordered according to justice, is the way that Plato says it. And I won't dwell too much. I mean, there's quite a lot to unpack about any one of these metaphors, obviously, and so I can't. It's unreasonable to try to treat every single one, because then we wouldn't get. I don't know. Then the lecture, person could, but then that would be at the expense of treating everything else, and so we can cover anything but not everything. So I'm not going to comment very far on any of these images, but just to give, just by way of giving examples of how Plato invokes imagery to convey concepts to convey meanings that are difficult to convey in conceptual language. Turning to how he depicts or symbolizes the good. This is, of course, in the famous parable of the cave, which is the good is symbolized by the sun itself. This is something that I'll come back to later in the lecture, but I just wanted to emphasize the way that the metaphor or the symbol or the image, it gives tangibility or sense something almost imaginative, but it gives it lends form to imaginal form to what otherwise again is kind of very difficult, very elusive to comprehend. And so the image kind of gives a body to something that fundamentally doesn't have a body, but by giving it a body, we can sort of it can serve to help us grasp the meaning of it. So the bodies are meant to present meanings to us, provided we're able to understand them and to perceive them analogically as analogies. Okay, and so and Plato again uses both of those, all of these metaphors when the kind of conceptual expression of the things it sort of runs out, and so what I'm trying to do now is to talk about these two subjects, justice and the good, and trying to do it in conceptual or literal, more or less, language, and Plato recognized that it's impossible from the beginning, and but I'm going to do the best I can and hopefully again it's helpful in some way. So beginning with justice, basically the dialogue, to set the scene of the dialogue, they're a group of people that come together, and after a little bit of banter, they begin to inquire into the nature of justice, and in some ways this is it's a sort of model for most of Plato's dialogues. They actually get off the topic of the nature of justice right from the start, and ask whether justice is beneficial, right, or whether it is even, in fact, whether it's a virtue or not. And Socrates, as usual, is encouraging them to not really try to go too far into these questions before you actually know what justice is. And many people, as always, Socrates kind of there are many foils. Plato presents many foils to Socrates in the dialogue. In the Republic, probably the most prominent foil is a figure called Thrasymachus, and he really exemplifies the antithesis of the Socrates as the archetype of philosopher. Thrasymachus comes in and immediately starts offering definitions of justice, and rather than in so many ways he's a foil to Socrates, and I'll just list a couple. One of them is that Thrasymachus comes in and immediately the first thing he does is to make peremptory assertions, and he'll make a statement, but he at the same time he'll make the statement and with obvious reluctance to follow through to what it actually means, like what is the actual significance of the statement that he's making. It's like he wants to say things without taking responsibility for saying them. He gives examples like the quintessential example of justice from Thrasymachus is justice is the interest of the stronger. This is what he arrives at after a couple other definitions, including repayment. Well, the interest of the stronger is the quintessentially the quintessential definition that Thrasymachus gives. Other of the characters offer examples, including justice being to give everyone his due, and the repayment of debts, and then also helping your friends, harming your enemies. It's Socrates' task to show how each of these definitions fall short in some way, and ultimately he rather than affirming that justice is to help the friends and harm the enemies, in dialogue with Socrates, it becomes that proposition is transformed, and that's a kind of like fundamentally ethical standard. And in some ways, in the Republic, we see the way in which Socrates' teaching transforms this fundamentally ethical standard, which is I think quite common, helping the friends, harming the enemies. Socrates, in some ways, offers us in history, a new vision of what ethics, the purpose and the meaning and the essence of ethics. He transforms help your friends, harm your enemies into something different, which is harm no one, do no harm. And I'll say a little bit more about Socrates' reasoning for that in a moment. But first, just returning to Thrasymachus, he shows kind of not only is what he says revealed to be incoherent and even at odds with itself. He'll say one thing, and rather than following through to see discover the significance of it, he'll immediately sort of jump ship and then make a different proposition. It's also clear right from the very outset he doesn't make any friends in the discussion. Like, he's not a amicable conversation partner, and in some ways this is the kind of like the artistry of Plato, where he's not only is this character espousing certain views, but he's also embodying them. And he comes into in fact in the language that Plato uses, it's like he comes in like a wildcat or something, like he pounces, he's ready to pounce or something. And it shows that in some ways Thrasymachus is also kind of embodying this idea of like, you're going to just come into the dialogue and win by brute force or something. And the Plato's dialogue, it really, it depicts the way in which that doesn't work. It's unsuccessful, and again, Thrasymachus basically makes enemies rather than friends, and it doesn't last very long either. And who knows what turned out from him. But the reason that I bring this up is because I think one extremely, immensely valuable function of the corpus of works that Plato left us, the dialogues, is they actually serve as kind of like they serve as manuals for conversation. Like they provide templates, almost paradigms, for how to conduct a productive conversation through disagreement. And it just seems to me it's especially every day, by the day, that seems to be a more precious capacity. And so I really value Plato so highly just for that reason. Because again, I think reading the dialogues actually it's working on us, not only from what we think we learn, but also from the way it helps us to it helps us to structure our concept of what a productive conversation looks like. And it's not the same thing as just agreeing. And in fact, the essence of dialectic that Socrates is always modeling is actually not agreeing, it's actually disagreement. The dialectic is arriving at understanding by way of disagreement. So disagreement it's a positive force, provided it can be ordered towards a positive end, which is again ultimately the search for truth or for understanding. And I think over and over again, Plato and through the figure of Socrates is offering us a template for how to approach that in a productive way. And part of it is that by the exception proves the rule. Thrasymachus, for instance, serves as a kind of a negative role model. So this is if you wish to have an unproductive dialogue, then do exactly like Thrasymachus. Socrates, on the other hand, shows us what's possible when you're really willing to follow ideas to where they lead, right? Without having prejudiced and foregone conclusions about where you want them to lead. That's of course one way to think about the difference between reasoning or rationality and rationalization. To be reasonable or rational, this means to seek the truth from the premises, seek the conclusion from the premises. In rationalization, you're always sort of marshaling the premises in order to fit a foregone conclusion that you've already, more or less consciously arrived at. But again, I think Socrates serves as a kind of, exemplary figure, as an archetype for true reason, true critical thinking, true dialectic. So again, I think these dialogues are so valuable as sort of manuals for how to conduct productive conversation. And so basically, just returning to the idea of justice, they again, Thrasymachus doesn't last very long, but one of Socrates' dialogue partners, Glaucon, actually, and again, a kind of a way that can model for us the effectiveness of conversation and dialectic. So arriving at understanding by way of disagreement. One of Socrates' dialogue partners actually sort of takes up the mantle of Thrasymachus, not necessarily because he believes Thrasymachus' idea that justice is in fact purely the interest of the stronger. It's kind of like the law of the jungle. Thrasymachus, suggests that you'll always be better off being unjust, and if so, in fact, justice is a vice and not a virtue. And Glaucon takes this much further. So he takes up the mantle of Thrasymachus, not because he necessarily believes it, but because he's concerned that it might be true. And so he wants to take, unlike Thrasymachus, he's willing to take the argument to where it leads, rather than just kind of making it as a blanket statement and just kind of throwing it down like a gauntlet. So Glaucon adds the idea that if what Thrasymachus suggested is right, then this person will be better off. He'll be able to help his friends, for instance, more effectively. He'll be able to harm his enemies more effectively. He'll be able to propitiate the gods more effectively, and so on and so on and so on. Why should we think that justice is anything else than really your own interests, maximizing your own interests? And if you're able to, that means you're stronger, and so then justice is kind of what you're due in that case. Socrates again, he's willing to explore the question, and he ultimately kind of reveals that there are many different elements to this argument, and rather than summarize it, I'm just going to I'm not going to summarize it, I guess, and I'm going to skip to kind of the conclusion I don't know what I'd say, the conclusive statement that Socrates is able to offer after a protracted conversation and argument, which is that fundamentally, even if it were true that you could benefit yourself, that confer profit to yourself by being unjust, and confer profit to your friends by being unjust, and your family and your and people around you, and even the gods. Socrates he points out that that you would be mistaken. You would seem to have benefited from being unjust, but in fact you've probably done the worst thing that you possibly could, which is to sort of disorganize yourself, disorganize your soul, and returning to the image of the three symbols of the soul: the human being, the lion, and the dragon, the many-headed beast. You've basically subjugated the human element in you, the rational capacity, to the dragon. In other words, you've turned yourself into a rationalizing machine, and so basically the dragon sets the conditions, and the human being, with the logic and the intelligence, is kind of like subordinated, and has to submit to the mandates of the dragon. And so basically, no harm that you can do. So along the lines of justice being to help your friends and harm your enemies, no amount of harm that you could do to anyone else will ever exceed the harm that you're doing to yourself in harming that person. And justice, then, it's a kind of justice is it's not only something that we would look at in a city, for instance, which Socrates does just after this, but also but he's really, again, he's using the city to illustrate the way in which justice is the same principle of justice that orders a city also orders the soul inwardly, and you're really harming yourself by acting unjustly. And anytime you seek personal profit at the expense of somebody else, you're also, again, you're conditioning yourself to be sort of like indentured to your desires. You're conditioning the human being to be indentured to the many-headed beast. And so ultimately, this is and fundamentally it represents a lack of wisdom. It's kind of like anti-sophical, the opposite of philosophy, and it represents the inability to grasp the nature of the good. And so this is a kind of a turning point in the dialogue once Socrates arrives at this statement, because then the dialogue naturally transforms and starts to turn toward not only justice but also the good. And so not only is not only does the dialogue as the form of the dialogue serve to educate us as kind of manual of conversation, but it's also before long we start to realize that it's also working on us to kind of turn us away from what seems to be good toward what's truly good. And this is it's often Plato describes it as in a number of different places, but basically he describes in the parable of the cave, for instance, he describes the way the prisoners they can't turn to see the mouth of see the mouth of the cave without turning their whole bodies. That you have to turn your whole body to start to exit the cave. You can't have like part of you seeking to go down into the cave or looking down into the cave, and the rest of you seeking to exit the cave. And the idea is like you have to achieve a unity of purpose. You have to achieve a unity of identity, and this is fundamentally what the nature of justice is, that everything is kind of ordered towards the proper end, and again, whenever we act unjustly, we are also at the same time inflicting this internal civil war, basically an internal civil war, a civil war amongst our various our various members, so to speak, and so the idea is like the Republic is the definition of justice, or this understanding of justice. It will reveal how saying that in some way injustice is preferable to justice. It really betrays a lack of understanding the nature of both of those, the meaning of both of those terms. Socrates, he in the parable of the cave, again, it's meant to be a symbol of the good, and so the meaning of the statement that you can't exit the cave if part of you is insisting on remaining in the cave. In the same way, your whole soul has to turn towards the good, or else you can't move towards the good at all. I hope this is clear. It's a really crucial statement, and I feel that I'm kind of stammering and trying to express it. But Socrates is really arguing that if you have elements of you that are turned away from the good, they will sabotage your efforts. And so the Republic, it's not only a manual of conversation, but it's also a manual of conversion. Converting literally means to turn. Verse is to turn in Latin. And so con, it's like it's an intensifier. It means like with your whole self. So all of you is turning. You have to turn all the way. He literally says this in the Republic. I have a quote. He says, "Our argument shows that the power and capacity of learning exists in the soul already, and that just as the eye was unable to turn from darkness to light without the whole body turning as well, so too the instrument of knowledge, the mind, can only, by a movement of the whole soul, be turned from the world of becoming into that of being, and learn by degrees to endure the sight of being, and of the brightest and best of being, in other words, the form of the good itself." This is I hope this is a clearly relevant statement. There are probably elements of it that are not so clear, specifically the differentiation between becoming and being. But I hope that by the end of this lecture, many things that seem very disparate are starting to form a coherent unity. And so I hope this is one example of a kind of a bridge that can connect this statement to other themes that have already come up. He differentiates between the world of becoming, which he compares or associates with darkness, and the world of being, which he associates with light and with the good. Why that distinction? And that's a quintessentially Platonic distinction. But his idea is that just like the example of the chair or the table, the table, any individual table is how would I say, it's there was a time before it existed. There will be a time. It's also in some ways slowly disintegrating, and maybe it happens slowly enough that you don't find out. It's like watching the hour hand on a clock. Maybe you can't see it happening, but eventually you find out because one of the legs falls off or something, and so the table is also at the same time like the opposite of table. Any individual table is always any particular table is always also includes non-table elements, and the whereas this is again, so all of the somehow everything is relates in a coherently in a single into a kind of single unified vision, but sometimes it's a struggle to illuminate this. The idea, so taking a chair for instance, I'll try to show how why the good, so I'll try to show how the good relates to being, and how the opposite of the good relates to becoming, because that's another one of these doctrines of Plato that many people misinterpret and think that Plato is kind of, they will say things like Plato is I don't know, like opposed to change and to development and to time and to progress and so on and so on. And they'll say Plato prefers this kind of static vision of the forms in heaven. And again, I think it's a caricature, and the reason is because what he says is something that he's pointing to an experience rather than a set of dogmas or doctrines. And the experience is that is to recognize that in a table or a chair, for instance, starting, we can use the table as the example. Again, any particular table will also include like the opposite of a table, and you know that because at one time it didn't exist, and in the future it will ultimately disintegrate. That's the way in which the table is also non-table. If you have if you're able to comprehend time in coherently as a single in a single scope, you'll recognize that the table is always it's always kind of like partly not table, and in the same way the table. So and then imagine that's the way in which the table can any particular table can approximate the form of the table, and so imagine the lifespan of any given table. It starts out basically in no relation to the form of the table because it doesn't exist yet. It first appears in a carpenter's mind, and then slowly what happens is that the idea from the carpenter's mind, the carpenter begins to sort of like impress that idea onto substance, or stamp the form into matter. And supposing that it's wood, slowly the table begins to approximate the form of the table, and it comes up to a certain approximation, but never the perfect approximation, for a number of reasons. Because again, the table there's only one single form of the table, and you recognize any particular table according to how close it comes to that form, but it can never be the same thing as the form. And again, we already know this because the table it's made of wood, for instance, and wood it's not essentially anything to do with tables, so it's not a pure table at all. But it's also so it moves in the lifespan of a table. It first comes closer to the form of the table, and then it starts to move away from the form of the table, almost in the instant that it's produced. Again, because even if we don't notice, it's starting to decay and to disintegrate. This is what Plato thinks of as the world of becoming. It's the world of created things created in matter, and the fact is that he's right about this. Is that everything is sort of at once approximating its archetype, but never arriving at that archetype, and at once approximating it and also falling away from it. And that he contrasts with the world of being. And this is not, people often think of it as a sort of like, again, separate worlds, or they imagine that Plato believed in some kind of, heaven of the forms in outer space somewhere. And I don't think that's right. I think he's the world of becoming and the world of being, it's the same world, or how would I say this? Maybe that's the wrong way to think of it. The world of becoming is the world of spatially extended objects. The world of being, it's not spatially extended in that way. And so you might say they're coextensive, like it's the same world, but they're different visions of the same world. They're different depths of intelligibility of that same world. Imagine that you are looking at a picture of a forest, and compare that to an actual forest. You realize that the picture of the forest, the actual forest has a dimension that the picture of the forest doesn't have. And in some way, the world of being, it's almost by analogy. It's what gives it gives a further, maybe this is a way to think of it. There are 3 dimensions of space. That's the world of becoming. There's a dimension of kind of like and 3 dimensions of space, and then also time. So it's kind of 4 dimensions. 3 dimensions of space and time. But there's a sort of like, how would I say, a dimension that's orthogonal, or a sort of a vertical. Imagine that's all represented on the horizontal plane. There's a kind of vertical or transcendent dimension. There's a dimension that's outside of time, that's outside of space as well. And that's the dimension of being, of the ideas, of what lends both identity and intelligibility to all of those so-called real things. They're real in virtue of the fact that they participate in the world of being, and the degree to which they participate in the world of being is the degree to which any particular object in the world of becoming exists ultimately. It's quite a different way of thinking than we're accustomed to, but I think it's even irrespective of whether it's true or not. It's also quite stimulating and even healthy, in the same way that it's like that exercise or fresh air is healthy, that it can to try to see things in a new way. It can be quite nourishing, and so and that's even irrespective of whether what Plato says is true or not. And so I hope that's somehow clear how the way in which being and becoming relate to one another, and how that in turn is related to form, and to the idea of things. Now I'll try to turn from justice to the good. I mentioned the idea that the Republic, it can be seen both as helping us to model conversation, but it also helps to convert our soul and orient our soul towards what is good, and away from what maybe seems good, towards what is truly good. And this is an image that repeatedly comes up in Plato. But any injustice that we entertain will actually serve to sabotage and undermine our efforts towards the good. In some way, Plato is making when he says you have to turn the whole soul away from the world of becoming into that of being, and learn by degrees to endure the sight of being. It's a kind of a way of saying that the way you do anything is the way you do everything. And because it's you doing those things, and so if your soul is kind of like at odds with itself, in inner turmoil, inner conflict, then the congress of your soul is having a sort of civil war. Then you will undermine your efforts towards striving for the good, and you will also tend to the same your inner condition will be also expressed through your actions, and so basically everyone is better off when we are able to entertain these ideas and struggle to grasp them, I guess. And it is a struggle. It's an assiduous process. And this is exactly what Plato is representing by making the exit from the cave an ascent. You can't just roll downhill. You have to you have to make the ascent, and you have to climb in some way. You have to exert yourself, and that's certainly how it is trying to grasp these ideas. So how do we think about the good now? Having said a little bit about justice, again, justice is it's one element of the good, but it's not the entirety of the good. This is, again, it's what accounts for the seemingly sort of like almost draconian image that Plato gives of the ideal republic. It's also responsible for later in Book 10 how he can, kind of summarily dismiss the poets from the Republic. Say poetry has no place in the Republic, and he's absolutely right according to the principle of justice. But again, it should be implicit in the whole argument that justice is one element of the good, but not the entirety of the good. And so, if we had a state, a republic that was ordered towards the good comprehensively, then it would almost certainly include the poets. It would include beauty. It would include art. It would include aesthetics, and so on. But so now Plato, there's a kind of arc of the dialogue, and probably the apex or the climax of the arc is in Book 6 and Book 7. This is when this is Plato's presentation of the parable of the cave, and when he treats the topic of the good. And so, trying to think how to move from justice to the good. Imagine Plato again suggested that if you think that injustice is better than justice, then you're kind of betraying the fact that you don't really grasp those terms in the kind of comprehensive way. Like you haven't succeeded in drawing out the implications of a statement like that. And this might be a little bit kind of abstract or confusing, but just think of like a band of unjust people, like a band of robbers is what I had in mind. And suppose they're robbing a train or something. You realize that if they're successful in robbing the train and they profit from it, then you might think, okay, well, this is an argument for this is evidence that injustice is better, is more profitable than justice. But again, this suggests that you've made a mistake. You failed to understand the terms because the degree to which the robbers are in fact successful in robbing that train is in many ways the degree to which they actually are able to embody elements of justice itself. And if you think about it, the fact that they're able to, for instance, cooperate, the fact that they're able to function together, that they're able to trust one another, this is the degree to which they will be successful. And you see this all the time in like the mafia or whatever, or, bands of criminals, where but not just criminals, all of us, when we're able to be successful to the degree that we're actually able to embody justice and virtues. And so again, thinking of this band of robbers, the degree to which they're able to cooperate and function in harmony, each one of them is able to play his or her part in the robbery. In some ways, that's fundamentally Plato's idea of justice, which is that every member and every being functions according to its proper end or its proper design or towards its proper good, basically. And this is why ultimately justice can only be defined in terms of the good, because that being the definition of it. But again, this band of robbers, they're only successful, they're only profitable through their injustice to the degree that they actually, in some ways, like betray their commitment to injustice and actually embody justice in their organization, their cooperation, their ability to, again, each member of the band of robbers playing his or her part in the whole, and so on, and so I hope that shows how injustice and justice, the relationship between them, and that in fact justice, there's a coherence to all of these things, that justice, it's related to the good in that way, because again, in order for the band of robbers to work, they have to somehow act in a just way amongst themselves anyway. And again, we see this, the way to which people that are inclined towards injustice will also be very unlikely to form enduring communities and enduring friendships, for instance. Aristotle emphasizes this point in Nicomachean Ethics, where ultimately only a only a virtuous person can really be friends, because the vicious person will always be trying to kind of like subvert the friendship for the sake of some kind of personal profit. And so I hope that connection is clear. And not to mention so by acting unjustly, these robbers have kind of forced themselves to almost made themselves unfree by forcing themselves to and almost like do damage to their own souls, sabotage their own souls by seeking personal profit. And so I hope that's clear about justice. And then so again, turning to the good, which I hope the relation is starting to become somewhat clear. It's maybe I picture the dawn when before it's too dark to see, and then gradually forms begin to take shape in front of our eyes. Maybe I flatter myself that as I go through this, that some of these ideas are starting to become a little bit clearer. Again, returning to the idea of the table, for instance, the table. I said that there's a kind of there's the form of the table, and that's the condition, both the condition for our ability to recognize any table as a table, including tables like piano benches, or like I suggested already, like a picnic, a towel, a tablecloth that you spread out on the ground. In some way, we're able to recognize that as a table, because we are able to entertain the idea of a table. By the same token, if I don't have an idea for a table, I will not be able to recognize any of its instances, no matter how good the table is. So that brings me to, I guess, what I'm trying to the connection that I'm trying to make now between the form of the table and the form of the good. The form of the good is somehow transcendent to all of the forms, which are in turn transcendent to all of the instances of those forms. So there's the world of becoming, in which there are instances of forms. There's the world of being, in which the forms subsist, and then there's the kind of the ultimate good, the transcendent good, which is even beyond the transcendent forms. And so what I will try to show is how, for instance, the simple thing like the form of the table, it can actually lead us to a contemplation of the form of the good. But again, this is where it's so I don't know, it almost gives you vertigo to try to think about it. But imagine the table. It actually becomes better and worse according to its ability to approximate the form of the table. Again, the form of the table doesn't look like anything exactly. In the same way that a myth or a symbol or an allegory can serve to lend image to invisible things, in the same way the form of the table, it's not visible to our eyes, but I mean the crux of it is that it is visible to our minds, or it's intelligible to our minds. And this is Socrates' fundamental metaphor. He says that which imparts true being to the known and the power of knowing to the knower. So let me just break that down. The power of knowing to the knower is again this ability for us to entertain an idea, and that's the condition for us to recognize any instances of that idea in the world of becoming. And so that which imparts true being to the known, this is also the idea, but it's instantiation in the material world, in physics. And so again, I gave the picture of the table, the wood of the table being the kind of the place in which the form of the table is stamped or incarnated. So Plato says, that which imparts true being to the known and the power of knowing to the knower is what I would call the idea of the good. Okay? So in other words, you have to have grasped the idea of the good in the same, by perfect isomorphism or analogy with the way that you have to have been able to grasp the idea of the table to recognize any of its instances. You have to have been able to contemplate and to perceive and to grasp the idea of the good in order to recognize any of its instances. Yeah? And so in this way, like the idea of the good, just like the idea of the table, really, this is already implicit. But it's not the same as just like learning a fact. It's not that way at all. It's not the same thing as learning a proposition or gaining some kind of information. It's totally different than that. The idea of something, it's not so much like a fact as a capacity. It's a power, really. It's the capacity to perceive facts, to perceive instances of whatever that idea is. And so just like the idea of the table provides the conditions of visibility for all tables, so the idea of the good provides the conditions of intelligibility, or allows us to recognize what is good. And so continuing with Plato, he says, that which imparts true being to the known and the power of knowing to the knower is what I would have you term the idea of the good. And this you will deem to be the cause of knowledge or science, and also of truth, insofar as the latter becomes the subject of knowledge. Plato, then, he uses this metaphor. He says, light and sight may be truly said to be like the sun, and yet not the sun. So in this other sphere, this kind of transcendent sphere, science and truth may be deemed to be like the good, but not the good. The good is somehow yet higher. This is what I suggested about transcendence. So he says, again, in this other sphere, science and truth may be deemed to be like the good, but not the good. So imagine just if you behold your visual field, and just think that it's only in virtue of light that anything is visible at all, that you're able to see how things look. It's only the ability to see how things look. It's only because of light that light confers on us the ability to see how things look. In the same way, the good, it confers the power on us to be able to not only perceive the good, but also to perceive. Light allows us to see what things look like or how things are. The good allows us actually to see what things are. So in the same way that light makes things visible, the good makes things intelligible. This is what Socrates says. He says, when the power of knowing to the knower. So it makes things intelligible. And you might say, how is that? Why is that? And I hope that I can do this justice. It's because just like the chair. Imagine the table. Forgive me. Imagine so you have a table that's instantly recognizable as a table, and then you have kind of like varying approximations of. In other words, you can move further away from the approximation of the form of the table. I suggested already the tablecloth. That's a picnic. Imagine though you sit down by a tree stump or something, and the tree stump becomes a table. This is already starting to diverge a little bit away from a table. In the same way, if you have like the perfect table, it has 4 legs and one of the legs falls off. Then it's a 3-legged table, and that's a little bit, it's a worse table. It's not as good of a table. The table has become worse, not better. The table was becoming better when the carpenter was fashioning it, and it's becoming worse now. I gave another example in an earlier lecture, the idea of a window. It's like if the window has to be transparent, and if it becomes, if you make a window out of non-transparent things like bricks, this has become such a bad window, the opposite of good. It's become such a bad window that it's not even a window anymore. So So on the one hand, you're not able to recognize it as a window. This is the idea of the power of knowledge, the power of intelligibility. It's not intelligible as a window. And it also doesn't exist as a window. It isn't a window. And so being and knowing are related in this way under the standard of the good. So again, taking the idea of a table becoming worse by losing a leg, it becomes in principle, if something can become worse, it can become better. It can and better is the good. And so again, the good is what it's the same. How would I say it? It's the same principle that is operative in. Same principle is operative all the way down. And so, in other words, what makes the table approximate the form of the table, that's also its approximation to the good. By approximation, I have in mind the image of coming closer to something. So by coming closer to the table, it's at the same time, or in some ways, as a kind. Again, the good is a kind of transcendent function. at the same time it's becoming better, thereby more intelligible as a table. Again, the wood by itself is not intelligible as a table. It has to come somewhat close to the form of the table before it becomes intelligible as a table. And in the same way, it's beginning to participate in the good. And so I hope this is somewhat. I hope that what I've said. I know it's been kind of like desultory and hard to follow, but in some ways it's probably an instance of fools, as they say, fools rushing in, where angels fear to tread. But I hope that what I've said has been somewhat helpful, and that it can, maybe serve to. The best thing is if it can serve to encourage and to stimulate further thoughts. But so this is probably a good place to draw the lecture to a close. The good being kind of, in some ways, the ultimate, the first and ultimate principle of all of Plato's works, and he acknowledges that it's he says basically the good is the last thing. The vision of the good is the final thing to arrive at. And this is again symbolized by the cave, but you see everything else before you finally see the sun. He says, whether true or false, this is a quote from Plato's Republic. He says, whether true or false, my view is that in the world of knowledge, the idea of the good appears last of all, and is seen only with great effort. But when it is seen, it is inferred to be the universal author of all things. And so I hope that what I've said has at least offered, maybe the best way to think of it is kind of like gestures or indications, like fingers pointing at the moon, so to speak. And I will be, I will be satisfied if I think that anybody who sees this video is inclined to follow these pointers. And so I'll draw this lecture to a close now, and but not before wishing everyone the best until the next time around. And so farewell.